On the night of March 27, 2026, a Range Rover rolled onto its side on a two-lane road in Jupiter, Florida. Inside that vehicle was Tiger Woods, a man who had won the Masters tournament 5 times, collected 15 major championships, and redefined what one human being could accomplish with a golf club in his hands. The car was destroyed, and so, it seemed, was something else. What do you do when the greatest athlete of his generation keeps destroying himself? Not on the golf course, but off it. What do you say about a man who has survived the impossible, risen from the ashes more than once, and still finds a way to fall? Because this was not the first time, not the second, not even the third. This was the latest chapter in a story the world has been watching and struggling to understand for over a decade. By the time the dust settled, Tiger Woods had been arrested on suspicion of DUI, charged with misdemeanor DUI with property damage, and announced he would be stepping away from the game he had dominated since before most of his rivals could walk. The 2026 Masters began on April 9th, without him. For the first time since 1994, Augusta National would open its gates to the world, and Tiger Woods would not be there. Not injured on the fairway, not grinding through pain on the back nine, simply absent. And somewhere in that absence lives the most haunting question in all of sports. What happened to Tiger Woods? Before the crashes, before the arrests, before the headlines that made the world wince and look away, there was a boy in Cypress, California, who picked up a golf club before he could properly hold a conversation. His name was Eldrick Taunt Woods, but the world would come to know him by something simpler, something that felt, even then, like a prophecy. Tiger. His father, Earl Woods, was a former Green Beret and Vietnam veteran, a man who had stared down the worst the world could offer and refused to blink. Earl saw something in his son that defied easy explanation. Not just talent, not just potential, something closer to inevitability. He began teaching Tiger to swing before the boy turned 2 years old. By 3, Tiger was putting on national television. By 5, he was being written about in golf magazines. But the sport had never seen anything like him, and the sport had absolutely no idea what was coming. At 21 years old, Tiger Woods walked onto the fairways of Augusta National and didn't just win the Masters, he dismantled it. His 1997 victory came by 12 strokes. 12, the greatest margin in tournament history. He finished at 18 under par, rewriting the record books with the calm authority of someone who had always known this moment was his. But here is what people forget. Here is what the trophy photos never show. Afterward, alone in his hotel room, Tiger called his father and wept. Not from joy, from relief, from the crushing weight of a dream finally given permission to breathe. That is the detail that changes everything. Because Tiger Woods was never just playing golf. He was carrying something, a father's sacrifice, a family's faith, the burden of being told from the very beginning that you were not merely good, you were historic. Can you imagine what it feels like to be told you are destined for greatness before you even understand what greatness means? Over the next decade, he answered that question on every course he touched. 15 major championships, 14 PGA Tour wins in a single season. A period of dominance so complete, so suffocating to his competitors, that sports psychologists began studying his opponent's collapse not as weakness, but as a natural human response to facing something that did not seem entirely human. He held all 4 major titles simultaneously. The Tiger Slam, a feat no golfer had ever achieved in the modern era. Analysts ran out of comparisons. Writers ran out of superlatives. Fans simply ran to the ropes, ran across fairways. I ran toward him the way people run toward fires, unable to explain the pull, only certain they needed to be close to it. What made Tiger Woods different wasn't just the swing. It wasn't the focus. It wasn't even the record. It was the hunger. The same hunger that never left his eyes. Not at 21, not at 30, not even when everything around him began to burn. And burn it would. Because legends are not built in the light. They are forged in what happens when the light goes out. There is a moment, invisible to everyone watching, when a man who has everything begins to lose himself. It doesn't happen in stadiums. It doesn't happen under camera flashes or in the glow of trophy ceremonies. It happens quietly, in hotel rooms, in private corners of a life that no championship has ever been able to fill. For Tiger Woods, that moment had been building for years before the world ever saw the cracks. But here is the question no one was asking at the height of his fame. What does a man who has conquered everything actually want? On November 27, 2009, the Friday after Thanksgiving, a neighbor found Tiger Woods lying on the ground outside his Florida home. Unconscious. His SUV wrapped around a fire hydrant and a tree. His wife, Elin Nordegren, stood nearby holding a golf club. The world went silent. In the days that followed, the story did not shrink. It exploded. One revelation followed another with the remorseless rhythm of a tide that would not stop. Affairs. Multiple women. A secret life constructed with almost architectural precision, hidden behind the most carefully managed public image in sports history. The man who had sold discipline and focus and singular dedication to greatness had been living, behind closed doors, an entirely different story. He released a statement, then another. Then, in February 2010, he stood before a gathering of cameras and people who had once worshipped him, and he spoke in the voice of a man who had finally run out of places to hide. I was wrong. I was foolish. I don't get to play by different rules. The silence in that room was the loudest thing golf had ever heard. What strikes you, watching that footage today, is not the confession, and it is the eyes. Because behind the rehearsed words and the careful posture, there was something raw and unguarded. The look of a man who had spent his entire life being told he was exceptional, only to discover that exceptionalism had never protected him from himself. Elin filed for divorce. The marriage, the family he had built, the children he clearly loved, fractured in the open air where once there had only been applause. Sponsors fled. Nike stayed. But the silence from the others spoke volumes. And then came something no public scandal could have prepared anyone for. The golf disappeared too. Not in defeat, not in injury. Tiger Woods simply stopped winning. The machine that had humbled every competitor for 15 years stalled, stuttered, and went quiet. He missed cuts. He withdrew from tournaments. He looked on the course, like a man searching for something he had misplaced, but could no longer name. Have you ever watched someone you admired come undone and felt, alongside the shock, something uncomfortably close to recognition? Because that is what Tiger Woods became in those years. Not a cautionary tale, not a villain. Something far more complicated and far more human. A mirror. A reflection of what happens when the armor we build around our pain becomes indistinguishable from who we are. The surgeries began. His back, long compressed under the torque of one of the most violent swings in professional golf, began to demand payment for decades of punishment. 4 back surgeries between 2014 and 2017. each one a negotiation between the man he had been and the body that was keeping score. And then, in the early morning hours of May 29th, 2017, a police officer found Tiger Woods asleep at the wheel of his Mercedes, the engine running. The car stopped in a lane of traffic in Jupiter, Florida. He was arrested for DUI. His eyes in the booking photo, vacant, lost, stripped of every layer of control he had ever constructed, told the story that no press release ever could. This was not a man who had fallen from grace. This was a man who had been falling for a very long time and had finally hit the ground where others could see. But here is what the obituaries for his career missed entirely. Here is the detail that changes everything. He got back up. There are moments in a life that do not bend. They do not negotiate. They do not offer second chances in the middle of their unfolding. They simply arrive, sudden, final, absolute, and demand that everything which comes after be measured against them. February 23, 2021 was that moment for Tiger Woods. It was a Tuesday morning in Rancho Palos Verdes, California. The sun had barely cleared the Pacific. The roads were quiet. Tiger was alone in a Genesis SUV, navigating the winding curves of Hawthorne Boulevard. A stretch of road locals knew to treat with respect. A descent that dropped sharply, dangerously, without much warning. He was traveling at 87 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. The vehicle crossed into the opposite lane, struck a raised median, went airborne, rolled, and rolled again. When the car finally came to rest in the trees at the bottom of the hill, mangled beyond recognition, the first responders who arrived on scene did not expect to find anyone alive inside it. But they found Tiger Woods, conscious, trapped. His right leg shattered in multiple places. The tibia and fibula snapped, the bones around his ankle and foot so severely fractured that doctors would later describe the injury as one of the worst they had ever seen in a patient who survived it. He was extracted from the wreckage with the jaws of life, a tool designed for situations where human hands are simply not enough. In the hours that followed, surgeons worked to piece together what remained. A rod inserted into the tibia, screws and pins stabilizing the ankle, procedures stacked on top of procedures, each one a negotiation with a body that had already been pushed further than most bodies ever go. And here is the question that hung over every operating room, every recovery room, every whispered conversation in the corridors of that hospital. Would Tiger Woods ever walk normally again? The answer, delivered by his own doctors with careful, measured words, was this. His career, in all likelihood, was over. Over. That word, that small, terrible word, dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Because you have to understand what golf had always been for Tiger Woods. Not a profession, not even a passion, something closer to a language. The only language in which he had ever been fully, completely fluent. The course was the one place where the chaos of his life organized itself into something controllable, something beautiful, something entirely his. Take that away, and what remains? He spent months learning to walk again. Months in which the man who had once covered Augusta National with the controlled fury of a force of nature was reduced to taking careful, measured steps across his own living room floor. Months in which the trophies on the shelf became artifacts from another man's life. And yet, you already know what comes next, because Tiger Woods has never been a man who accepts the verdict of circumstance. In April 2022, 14 months after an accident that should have ended everything, Tiger Woods walked up the 18th fairway at Augusta National to a standing ovation that shook the Georgia pines. He had not won. He would not win. But he was there, upright, moving, defying, with every step. The prognosis that had been written for him in that hospital 14 months before. The crowd understood what they were witnessing. Not a comeback. Something rarer and more elemental than that. A man refusing to be finished. The tears in the gallery that day were not for the golf. They were for the recognition, the deep, private recognition that every human being carries of what it costs to keep going when every reasonable argument says stop. Do you know that feeling? That moment when stopping would make perfect sense. And yet something inside you, something stubborn and inarticulate and maybe a little irrational, refuses. That is what Augusta saw in April 2022. But the body, unlike the will, does not run on stubbornness alone. And the years that followed would prove, again and again, that the crash on Hawthorne Boulevard had not just broken Tiger's leg. It had changed the terms of everything that came after. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that does not show up in medical reports. It does not appear on X-rays. It does not register in the assessments of surgeons or the careful language of press releases. It lives somewhere deeper, in the accumulated weight of a man who has spent years fighting not one battle, but the same battle, over and over, against a body that keeps changing the terms of the agreement. After Augusta 2022, the world wanted to believe the story was complete. The comeback, the resurrection, the ending that justified everything that came before. We wanted to close the book on the suffering and simply celebrate the miracle of the man still standing. But what happens when the miracle has to keep happening, month after month, surgery after surgery, and the body begins to send a different message? Tiger played the 2022 Open Championship at St. Andrews with the careful, immeasured movement of a man negotiating with pain in real time. Every swing a calculated risk. Every step down a slope, a private negotiation between will and consequence. He missed the cut, but he walked those fairways, the most historic fairways in golf, with something in his bearing that defied easy description. Not defeat, not triumph. Endurance. Then came the withdrawals, the missed tournaments, the surgical calendars that replaced the competition calendars. In 2023, he withdrew from the Masters. In 2024, he returned, visibly diminished, visibly determined, and made the cut, his body held together by technology and stubbornness in roughly equal measure. In October of that same year, he underwent back surgery again, his fifth significant procedure in a decade. The kind of number that, to spoken plainly, stops a room cold. Have you ever watched someone you admire keep choosing the harder path, not because it is heroic, but simply because they do not know how to choose otherwise? Because that is the complicated truth about Tiger Woods in these years. The persistence was not always beautiful. Sometimes it was painful to witness. Sometimes it looked less like courage and more like a man unable to accept the conversation his own body was trying to have with him. And yet, and this is the detail the critics always miss, he kept showing up. He made his TGL debut in early 2026, competing in a technology-driven indoor golf league he had helped create. His swing still carrying traces of the violence and beauty that had once made galleries fall silent. After competing, and he spoke about Augusta with the voice of a man who had learned to hold hope carefully, like something fragile. "I've been trying," he said. "Just this body is... It doesn't recover like it did when it was 24, 25. It doesn't mean I'm not trying. I've been trying for a while. I keep trying. I want to play. I love the tournament. I've loved being there since I was 19 years old. Read those words again. Not the public statement, not the press conference voice. The real voice underneath. The voice of a 50-year-old man standing on the edge of something he cannot quite reach, still unwilling to walk away from it. There is something in that admission that cuts deeper than any championship ever could. Because greatness, in its truest form, is not the absence of limitation, and it is the refusal to let limitation have the final word. But here is what the narrative of resilience always obscures. Here is the shadow side of every comeback story that the highlight reels conveniently omit. The pain does not disappear between the triumphant moments. It simply waits. And while Tiger Woods was managing his back, managing his Achilles, ruptured in March 2025, keeping him out of Augusta for a second consecutive year, he was also managing something else. Something that had never fully been addressed. Something that had surfaced in 2017, been set aside, and quietly accumulated interest in the years that followed. The prescription medications that got him through the surgeries, through the recoveries, so through the nights when the body that had carried 15 majors and survived a near-fatal crash demanded something in return for its continued cooperation. Hydrocodone, a prescription opioid, legitimate, documented, medically necessary for a man carrying the kind of chronic pain that most people will never come close to understanding. But legitimate necessity and safe management are not always the same conversation. And on the morning of March 27, 2026, those two conversations finally collided on a two-lane road in Jupiter, Florida, in front of the entire watching world. Some mornings arrive without warning, not in the meteorological sense, not in the way a storm announces itself with darkening skies and shifting wind, but in the deeper sense, the human sense, the way certain mornings carry, embedded in their ordinary fabric, a reckoning that has been years in the making, patient, inevitable, waiting for exactly the right moment to make itself known. March 27, 2026 was that morning for Tiger Woods. Jupiter, Florida. A two-lane road. A Range Rover moving at speed toward a turning truck with a trailer attached. The sequence of events that followed lasted only seconds, but the consequences will outlast years. Tiger attempted to overtake the truck. There was no room. The SUV struck, veered, and rolled onto its driver's side with the casual violence of physics indifferent to legend. When it came to rest, the man inside was alive, shaken, disoriented, marked, but alive. The officers who arrived on scene noted what they saw with the clinical precision of people trained to document rather than interpret. Bloodshot eyes, pupils described in the official affidavit as extremely dilated. A breathalyzer test that detected no alcohol, because alcohol was not the conversation. 2 pills found in his pocket, identified as hydrocodone, a prescription opioid. Medication, he confirmed to the arresting officer that he had taken earlier that day. Legitimate, documented, prescribed for the chronic pain that had become the permanent weather system of his body. He was handcuffed, and somewhere in that image, Tiger Woods, a 15 major championships, 50 years old, hands bound behind his back on a Florida roadside, lives the full weight of everything this story has been building toward. Can you imagine that moment? Not the celebrity, not the icon, just a man, in pain, in trouble, on the side of a road, staring down the consequence of a battle he had been fighting privately for longer than most people knew. He was charged with misdemeanor DUI with property damage and refusal to submit to a lawful test. He pleaded not guilty. The state of Florida moved quickly, subpoenaing his prescription drug records, pulling the thread of a story that had begun quietly in the recovery rooms of 5 surgical procedures and a near-fatal crash on a California hillside 5 years before. This was his second DUI arrest. The first had come in 2017. The same year, the same city, the same quiet Florida roads that seemed to keep calling him back to his most exposed moments. That time, he had been found asleep at the wheel, the engine running. A man at the intersection of exhaustion and medication, and a body that had simply demanded rest in the worst possible place. He had navigated that, probation, community service, drug testing, the machinery of consequence, processed and survived. But survival and resolution are not the same thing. And here, in the gap between those two words, is where the most honest part of this story lives. 4 days after the crash, Tiger Woods released a statement, not to a press conference, not through a spokesman, directly on his own platform, in his own words, the way a man speaks when he has finally stopped managing the distance between who he is and what people see. I know and understand the seriousness of the situation I find myself in today. I am stepping away for a period of time to seek treatment and focus on my health. This is necessary in order for me to prioritize my well-being and work toward lasting recovery. I'm committed to taking the time needed to return to a healthier, stronger, and more focused place, both personally and professionally. I appreciate your understanding and support and ask for privacy for my family, loved ones, and myself at this time. Read that statement not as a public relations exercise. Read it as a human being reads a letter from someone who has finally, after years of armor and deflection and the particular loneliness of greatness, allowed themselves to be seen. Seek treatment. Not manage, not address. Seek. There is a world of difference in that word. A world of difference between a man controlling a narrative and a man surrendering to a truth. So Augusta National responded with the grace of an institution that understood what it owed him, and what he had given it across 5 green jackets and 30 years of history that neither of them will ever fully untangle from the other. Augusta National Golf Club and the Masters Tournament fully support Tiger Woods as he focuses on his well-being. Although Tiger will not be joining us in person next week, his presence will be felt here in Augusta. His presence will be felt here in Augusta. Think about what that sentence carries. The ghost of the chip shot on 16 in 2005. The tears on 18 in 2019. The standing ovation of 2022. Given not for victory, but for the sheer staggering fact of his presence. See, a tournament that had spent decades trying to contain him now holding space for his absence, and finding, even in that absence, that he filled every corner of the place. The 2026 Masters opened on April 9th without Tiger Woods. For the first time since 1994, the tournament began without him, and without Phil Mickelson, who had announced his own withdrawal just days before for personal health reasons. An era, unannounced and unceremonious, stepping quietly off stage. Did you feel it? That particular quality of silence that only arrives when something that has always been there is suddenly, irrevocably, gone? The fans still walked to the 16th hole, still stood behind the ropes and pointed at the slope where a ball once rolled, impossibly slowly, into history. I still looked for him in the gallery, in the leaderboard, in the particular electricity that 30 years of Tiger Woods at Augusta had permanently embedded in the Georgia air. He was not there. But the question he had left behind, the question that this crash, this arrest, this statement had burned into the consciousness of everyone watching, was everywhere. What comes next for Tiger Woods? Here is the thing about legends. They do not end cleanly. They do not arrive at a final chapter with the tidy resolution of a film that knows its running time. They bleed into the present tense, messy, unresolved, stubbornly alive, demanding that we hold two contradictory truths at the same time without flinching from either one. Tiger Woods is the greatest golfer who ever lived. Tiger Woods is a man in crisis. Both of those sentences are true. Both of them are incomplete without the other. And the discomfort of holding them together, refusing to let one cancel out the other, is precisely where the most honest version of this story lives. Can you do that? Can you hold both truths at once? The greatness and the wreckage, without needing to choose which one is real? Because that is what Tiger Woods asks of us. Not admiration, and not condemnation. Something harder and more demanding than either: the willingness to see a human being in full. Consider what he has given the world. 15 major championships in an era when the competition had never been deeper, the courses never more demanding, the scrutiny never more relentless. A 1997 Masters victory that did not merely set records. It redefined what was possible in the sport. A 2019 Augusta triumph at age 43 that produced what many consider the single greatest moment in the history of professional golf. Not for the score, but for what it represented. A man rebuilt from scandal, from addiction, from 4 back surgeries, standing on the 18th green at Augusta National while the world wept for reasons it could barely articulate. While he made golf matter to people who had never cared about golf. He made Sunday afternoons in April feel like shared religious experience. He made an entire generation of athletes, in every sport, in every country, believe that the gap between good and transcendent could be closed by something as unglamorous and absolute as will. That is a legacy no arrest record touches. That is a contribution no headline diminishes. And yet, here is the question that lingers, the one that the highlights cannot answer and the trophies cannot silence. At what cost? The back that bent under decades of one of the most violent swings in professional history. The knee surgeries that began before he was 30. The 2021 crash that should have taken his life. The prescription medications that became, over years of legitimate medical need, something more complicated and more dangerous than their original purpose. The pattern, the same Florida roads, the same early mornings, the same SUVs rolling in ways that physics never intended, repeating itself across 9 years with the grim persistence of something unresolved. What was Tiger Woods running from? What did the golf fill? And what did it fail to reach? We do not know the answer to that question. And perhaps that is the most important thing to say plainly. Without drama or false resolution, we do not know. The inside of another human being's pain is territory that no biography, no documentary, no confession ever fully maps. What we know is this. Somewhere in a treatment facility, as the 2026 Masters opens without him for the first time in 3 decades, a Tiger Woods is doing something he has rarely allowed himself to do in 50 years of living at the intersection of greatness and expectation. He is stopping. Not being stopped by injury. Not being pulled from the game by a shattered leg, or a torn Achilles, or a car wrapped around a California hillside. Choosing to stop. Choosing, in his own words, to seek treatment. To prioritize his well-being. To work toward lasting recovery. Do you understand how significant that word is? Lasting. Not temporary. Not managed. Lasting. There is, in that word, the first real evidence of a man no longer fighting the wrong battle, no longer pointing his extraordinary will at the wrong target, no longer treating his body as an instrument to be pushed past every reasonable limit in the service of a game, however beautiful, to however defining. That was never going to fill the space that needed filling. Augusta National said his presence would be felt in Augusta, even in his absence. They were right, but not in the way they meant. His presence was felt not in the leaderboard, not in the roar of a gallery chasing a Sunday charge down Amen Corner. His presence was felt in the conversation, the one that happened in living rooms and sports bars, and quiet moments between people who had watched him for 30 years and found themselves, on the first Thursday of April 2026, genuinely uncertain about what they were hoping for. Not a comeback, not a record, not another resurrection for the highlight reel. Something simpler, something that no major championship has ever been able to represent, that he was okay. Because here is what 30 years of Tiger Woods have ultimately taught the watching world. The lesson buried beneath the trophies and the scandals and the crashes and the miraculous returns and the arrests and the statements written in the voice of a man finally telling the truth. Greatness is not armor. It never was. The green jackets and the major titles and the Nike campaigns and the Sunday red shirts. None of it was protection. None of it was resolution. All of it was, in some essential way, a conversation about the pain rather than a conversation with it. And the most courageous thing Tiger Woods has ever done. More courageous than the 2019 Masters. More courageous than walking Augusta on a reconstructed leg in 2022. And more courageous than any shot he ever struck in competition. Maybe this. Sitting still long enough to finally listen. What do you think? Is this the end of Tiger's story? Or the beginning of the chapter that matters most? The greatest golfer who ever lived is 50 years old. He is somewhere quiet. He is, for the first time in perhaps his entire life, not trying to win anything. And the world that booed him and worshipped him and pitied him and celebrated him and projected onto him every dream and fear it had ever carried about greatness and failure and the price of both, is waiting. Not for a comeback. For the man, if this story moved you, if somewhere in Tiger's battles you recognized something of your own, then this channel is exactly where you need to be. We do not just tell stories here. We tell the truth inside the stories. The part that the highlight reels cut. The part that the trophies were never able to cover. So, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city, your country, your corner of the world in the comments below. Let us know you were here. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about the people who shaped our world, told the way they deserve to be told, then hit that subscribe button right now, before the next video begins, because the next story is already waiting. And trust me, you do not want to miss it.